Conoscere un X-Men? Fatto, anzi ci ho fatto di più, ci ho fatto una bella chiacchierata e l'ho anche filmata per poterla presentare a voi. A chi mi riferisco? A James McAvoy, non solo attore del film X-Men, ma anche attore protagonista di Split, nel quale lui interpreta una persona affetta da DID, disturbo dissociativo dell'identità. In particolare James in questo film ricopre il ruolo di una persona al cui interno sono presenti ben 23 tipi di personalità differenti. La chiacchierata con lui è stata molto interessante e ve la lascio guardare. A dopo. What did you think when Knight talked to you about playing someone with dissociative identity disorder, and what convinced you to take the part?
I thought that, first and foremost, the idea of playing someone with dissociative identity disorder was interesting, but not in itself a reason to do a job, to do a movie or take the role or the roles. It's got to be a good story. It's got to have a point. It's got to have an interesting way of telling it. And also, all of those characters who live within the one body that I was going to portray had to be written really well. Luckily for me, they all were. And luckily for me, I really liked the point that Knight was trying to make, which is, you know, it's a common theme in storytelling, which is what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. The bad things that have happened to us forge us into a harder metal, you know. And I like that story. It's a story that we see in comic book movies all the time with superheroes and supervillains. But he was exploring it in a slightly more psychological manner, and in a much more inside the inner workings of the brain fashion. And that was something that I was excited about. I spoke to him and I asked him, which character do you want me to play, before I'd read it? And he just said, you know, just read it and get back to me. But have an open mind and just jump in, just try and be brave, you know. So I finished reading it and I was pretty certain immediately that I wanted to do it.
How did you prepare for this role?
I did a lot of reading. I read a lot of diaries for people with DID, with different authors communicating to each other at different times. When people with DID weren't necessarily capable of being co-conscious, but they were able to communicate with each other in the form of diary, and I found that fucking fascinating. Then the other thing that I found really useful was I spoke to some medical professionals and stuff, but that was helpful. But I needed to see and hear from people with DID, and one of the most valuable resources I had was YouTube. People vlogging, people with DID vlogging and saying, this is me, this is who I am, these are my hopes and fears and my dreams, and this is what I want out of life. And by the way, this is her, and this is what she wants, and this is him, and this is what he wants, and sort of joyously presenting themselves to the world, not just in a diary, which was brilliant, which was talking to themselves, but talking to the world and going, I'm here, I actually exist. DID is a real thing. And that was exactly what I needed, I think. Then beyond that, it was a case of not preparing to play a part where I was playing a man called Kevin who has dissociative identity disorder. I didn't do that. I prepared 9 different characters, and they just all happened to share the same body. But that body had to change every time I was playing a different one. So you have to find out how they hold themselves, whether they slouch, whether they sit straight, whether they've got a long neck or a short neck, or how their mouths are held, or how they sound, and how they use their hands, things like that. So that was a lot. It was 9 times the amount of work in no amount of time.
Both during filming and now that you've wrapped, what kind of emotions or thoughts did you have about your character?
During filming, I loved them all. They were all interesting people in their own right, and they were all quite dynamic characters in their own right. Though I felt sad for even the arguably bad characters. And the malevolent antagonists, I felt sad for them. I had sympathy for them because they had been so important to the larger group at one point. They'd performed an important function for the community that lived within Kevin's body for a long time. But when they were no longer needed and when had become slightly problematic, they'd been shut down and they'd been pushed aside and become less dominant within the community. And I felt sad for them. They'd been ghettoized within the mind, you know, and that repression, as with anything, when you try to push something down, it comes back with violence, I think. So I felt sympathy for them. The guy at the end that I play, this sort of almost otherworldly, unhuman character that I play at the end, I liked him because he was just so full of joy. He's sort of a bad guy, but he was full of love for what every single personality and person that lives within that same body are, and so full of love for the damaged people of the world.
In the film, you play a person with 23 different personalities. Do you think that this is similar to an actor's life or an actor's job in some way?
Sometimes, yeah, especially if you're doing a lot back to back, you can you wonder what your life is. You don't know, you don't have, much like some people with DID would become conscious and be like, fuck, where am I? Do you know what I mean? And how did I get here? How did I get into this hotel? And you're like, Jesus, all right, who was in charge? Which one of you got me here? Sometimes you have that as an actor, where you're like in a different city every day, talking to different journalists every day, or playing a different character every day. But yeah, no, I think there's a similar thing, but of course, it's wildly different, and we're much more.
As an actor, and especially in this film, do you ever find it difficult to switch back to your normal personality?
A couple of times in my career, but generally, no. Generally, I'm fine, and particularly on this job, I was really fine. I think when you get to express everything you want to say, when the scene gets completely explored, the character manages to be completely examined, and you as a performer get to get everything out, then you're fine. It's when you can't do that, when it's an unsatisfying experience, that you take it home with you.
Which was the most difficult scene for you to film, and why?
There's a scene near the end where I play, I think, 8 of the personalities that live within Kevin's body in one scene, and I slide from one to the other. And that was just difficult technically because, you know, I'd done a lot of work to make sure that they were all very clearly different people. The audience could be in no doubt about who I was playing at any one time. But when you're doing it quickly, going from one to the other, it becomes technically very difficult to keep them separate, and they start to the edges of them start to blur, and as an actor, your work becomes less specific. So that was difficult for the first hour maybe, and then I got into the rhythm and started to find just the definition again in each character, and started to really enjoy that part of the movie.
Trovo sempre molto interessante addentrarmi nei backstage dei film. Se lo è anche per voi, credo che potrete trovare soddisfazione nel guardare questi altri 3 video che ho creato per voi. In uno c'è un'intervista al regista di Split e gli altri 2 sono una recensione che ho fatto su questo film e poi delle vostre domande cui do risposta in un altro video ad hoc. Anche per oggi è tutto, grazie e alla prossima. Ciao!